Let's go old school serpent. The videos I typically make nowadays are all deep diving explorations into topics, and I left behind the type of videos I used to make when I started this channel, which were short philosophical overviews. Today I want to pull back and take a broader perspective. The issue at hand is the hot topic of globalism, and its relation to nationalism and to individualism. This is going to be a very basic historical synopsis of one way in which the ideas evolved to where we are today, and what I think the liberal position should be on this issue. So, a shorter, lighter video than usual. Tell me if you want more of those. The idea of humanity coming together to create a global society existed in religious thought as something that will happen at the end of days. Towards the end of the 18th century, it started to be seen as something that humanity should work on by itself, without waiting for divine intervention, and that this will actually be the thing that will bring about the end of days. That is, that once we create a global society, it will be the end of history, the end of conflict, and humanity shall live happily ever after. This is also when the idea of progress started to be a thing, and progress was, in some systems of thought, meant to end with the establishment of a global society. When we talk about progress, the philosophy of Hegel casts a long shadow over the entire period. As always, when I talk about Hegel, I must preface it with the warning that what I present here is a very shallow and quite inaccurate presentation of his thinking, because if I attempt to actually explain it, I'll have to talk for at least 5 hours, and for the last 4 hours and 40 minutes of it I'll probably be talking to myself. So we are only talking here about some of Hegel's ideas, and how they influence modern thought on the issue at hand. Hegel delineates the process of the human spirit's growth and progression. It is a logical progress, moving from one idea to a more complex one. Every time a new idea is formed, it creates a myriad of problems and conflicts which need to be resolved. Finally, a new idea is formed that resolves the conflicts, and achieves a higher level of harmony in which all the previous ideas are still contained, and can coexist without contradicting each other. This, however, creates new conflicts that need to be resolved, and so forth. This is how the human spirit progresses through history, becoming ever more sophisticated and richer in content, until it achieves its full potential, which is the creation of a society in which everyone is free, and they all coexist. Hegel believed that his time, the beginning of the 19th century, marks the end of history, in which such a society was achieved. Let's take one idea as an example. At some point, the idea of the individual was formed, and some humans started to regard themselves as free individuals, responsible for their own identity and actions. This idea, however, negates the idea of life in a society, with other humans, in which you have to obey external laws. The resolution is the idea of a free society, in which individuals are free and responsible for their actions, and choose, of their own free will, to give up on some of their freedoms, because they understand that it is for their own good. The individual thus develops two identities. One is their personal identity, in which they pursue their selfish goals, but limit themselves because they understand that they are part of a society. The other is the national identity, in which they pursue what is good for the nation, but they understand that the good of the nation must not infringe on the rights of the individuals. Thus, both the idea of the individual and the idea of the nation are still maintained within this new idea of a free society, and they can coexist in the consciousness of the people without contradicting each other. What Hegel calls the spirit is basically the sum of the consciousnesses of all people. But every private consciousness is different, and at a different stage of progress. When the idea of a free society was formed, for instance, it existed only in the minds of a few. Only when it reached critical mass within the population could the free society actually become manifest. And even within such a society, there would still be those who would not develop the consciousness of a free individual. Plus, not every nation is at the same stage of progress, so while some already became free societies, others did not. Hegel believed that the progress of the spirit is inevitable, and will eventually lead to all nations becoming free societies, based on enlightened ideas. When I said that he believed history ended, it should be understood in the ideological, not the practical sense. Meaning that the idea of how to form an enlightened society was already created within the spirit, but still needed time to spread and take over the entire world. This, however, would not create a global society. Hegel believed that the nation-state is the final form, the highest idea. Even when all nation-states will become enlightened, they will still be different from one another, because every nation has a different character, affected by the environment it grew in. Enlightened states will generally live in peace with each other, respecting international law and each other's rights, but there is always a chance that they will have conflicts that might turn violent. An everlasting global peace is not possible in Hegel's worldview. For many who came after him, however, this was not good enough. Some thought that another stage is still missing, which will maintain everything Hegel spoke of, but will also achieve a higher harmony, in a global federation of nation-states. They pointed out that free and democratic nation-states don't fight each other, so if we work together, as a global community, to bring democracy to every country, we shall have world peace. Thus, you add another identity to your consciousness, a universal, humanist identity, which sees itself as part of humanity and aspires to create a global society where the world is at peace and everyone is happy. When you think about the interests of your nation, you limit them by the need to protect the rights of those who are not part of your nation, but are still your brothers and sisters, as you are all part of one big humanity. On the other hand, you understand that in order for everyone to be happy, they have to live as individuals in their nation-states. Therefore, your globalist views are limited by the need to maintain the sovereignty of nations and the rights of individuals. This attitude is what I shall call the moderate left position, and it was held by many liberals from the 19th century onwards. Some, however, believe that there could never be world peace as long as nations still exist, and therefore we should aspire to transcend our national identity and leave only the humanist, global identity. This is the extreme left position, typifying communists and anarchists. This position often leads to collectivism, which erases the individual as well. Another approach was to say that since we can never truly have a global community, there would never be world peace, so we should forget about humanity and focus on our own nation and country. This is the moderate right-wing position. This position generally respects the sovereignty of other states and tries to coexist peacefully with them, but is also suspicious of their intentions towards our state. Then, there is the position that believes that our nation is better than other nations, and should therefore rule over them, or even rule the world, in order to bring world peace. This is the extreme right-wing position. There were also those who focused on the individual identity, but we shall ignore them in this video, because I want to focus on the battle between nationalism and globalism. As we can see, the modern age was dominated by the nation-state. Both the moderate left and the moderate right were nationalists, and, up to World War I, this was seen as the more progressive position, battling against the remains of the feudal order that was still in power. Alas, nationalism acquired two parasites along the way. One was imperialism, that reached its peak in the 19th century. Nationalism initially rose as a reaction to imperialism, but eventually they blended. As the great European empires spread around the globe, their nationalism veered towards the extreme right-wing position of believing they should rule the world. The other parasite was race theory, which emerged in the latter third of the century. Race and nationality became interlinked, and many claimed that in order to better our nation, we should purify it from foreign racial elements. In the first half of the 20th century, This type of nationalism, with these two parasites, led to horrific wars, genocides, racist laws, and other atrocities that turned the Western spirit sour on the entire modern project. Hegel, after World War II, became very unpopular. The world was still thinking in nationalist terms after World War II, but the memory of the two world wars brought gradual erosion. The moderate right-wing position started to be associated more and more with the extreme right, losing popularity. Then again, the world also witnessed the horrors of the extreme left-wing position that were ongoing in the Eastern Bloc. So what took over was the moderate left-wing position. The Western Bloc thought along the lines of humanity working together, still divided into nation-states, but nation-states that are all democratic and live peacefully with each other. And Western countries did, indeed, live peacefully with each other, trading and cooperating, aiding one another's mutual growth. Then, in the 1960s, another shift occurred. The 60s were when the project of creating utopia lost its charm. Western people were already living a good life, so why work on some utopian future instead of enjoying the now? At the same time, there was greater focus on groups within the nation, and the problems that they faced. It was shown that the ideal man that we were trying to create, the man who would be fully enlightened and bring world peace, was made in the image of the straight white male, and that this created biases against all those who were not. Thus, the left focused more on liberating those other identities. The aim was not to undermine the nation-state, but to make it more pluralistic, allowing greater freedoms to groups within it. But this led to the erosion of nationalism, as leftist thinking no longer thought about developing the national identity, but focused on developing communal identities. Meanwhile, the moderate right was less accommodating towards these groups, and fought to preserve their national cohesion. This was the main battle between left and right in those years, and it made the West stronger. In the 1990s, when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, it appeared that the Western way had won the historical battle, and is going to establish a global community of democratic nation-states living in world peace. But this also brought the return of the extreme left-wing position. The global cooperation between the democratic nation-states gradually corroded what made them different from each other, and made it easier for their citizens to imagine themselves as citizens of the world. For those living in Europe, traveling from country to country in the continent, and finding a friendly environment in each, it's very easy to imagine that this is how it is all over the world, that people everywhere think like them. Many Westerners have little appreciation for how mentally different from them people in some other regions of the world are. So the fault for not achieving world peace already is put on ideologies that divide us, like, for instance, nationalism. Many organizations in the West are now devoted to bringing about the global society, and they believe they should undermine the nation-state in order to achieve it. The outcome, of course, is that the nation-states are being undermined only in the West, which means that democracy is being undermined. Not that the extreme left globalists care much. As usual, their position drives many of them to dismiss not just nationalism but also individualism, and develop a collectivist way of thinking. They also piggybacked on the moderate left's battle for communal identities, and started arguing that the national identity stands in the way of these communities, and that individuals should therefore forego their personal aspirations and join their group's battle against the allegedly oppressive national identity. And their way of thinking has been spreading. In fact, this is what is seen as the left-wing position now, while what I call the moderate left-wing position, even though it is also globalist, is now branded as right-wing, ultra-nationalist, and sometimes even extreme right-wing. When we say globalism today, we are talking about the extreme left-wing position. This is a serious threat to democracy. There has never been a liberal democracy that was not a nation-state, and it is yet to be shown that such a thing is even possible. You must have a strong national identity shared by the people of the country to allow for the pluralism of identities and ideologies that make a democratic state. In every country in the world that doesn't have a strong national identity, the result is either chaos, anarchy, and civil war, or a strongman taking over and maintaining order through brute dictatorial force. If the globalists get their way, this is what will probably happen to today's liberal democracies. One effect of this globalism was the re-emergence of the right-wing position. Some adopt the moderate right position, and just want to defend the nation-state and quell the forces of globalism. But there are also many who believe that this is not enough, that the rise of globalism shows that democracy has failed, and that therefore we need to fight back with ultranationalism and authoritarian rule that will ensure the prevalence of the nation. The extreme right-wing leaders of the past are portrayed as heroes who stood up to the forces of globalism. The fact that they destroyed their own countries and nations is explained as merely their failure to stop globalism from destroying them. And so, on the right as well as on the left, the anti-democratic forces are in ascendance. So, what do I, as a liberal, believe the answer to all of that should be? Well, first of all, we should re-emphasize nationalism. Go back to the position that holds a national identity to be as important as individual and global identities. To that, we should also add the communal identity, in a Hegelian way that makes all these identities support each other. The individual becomes richer in character the more communities he belongs to, safer and freer when she is part of a nation, and better when they see themselves as part of the brotherhood of man. The community is better off when it is made of free individuals, so it should be open to people joining and leaving it, and belonging to other communities at the same time. The community should also integrate into the nation, become part of its mosaic, and understand that a strong democratic nation is needed to defend its group rights. The nation should aspire to provide individual rights to its members, and as much autonomy as possible to the communities within it, while living at peace with other nations. And humanity should aspire to create a pluralistic world where every nation is sovereign, and groups and individuals within the nations are free to manifest their identities. As an individual, then, you should keep holding to and cultivating your individual identity, your communal identities, your national identity, and your humanist identity. Furthermore, we should re-legitimize the moderate right-wing position, the one that says, our country comes first. It is essentially a benign position. It might become malignant, but it isn't malignant in itself, and we should stop associating it with the extreme right. Re-establish the dialogue between the moderate left and the moderate right, standing together against extremist positions and strengthening the national identity. We can continue to work on the project of establishing a global community, but allow only steps that don't jeopardize the nation-state and individual rights. This is still the best position, and it is still popular enough to prevail. One more thing. When we talk about nationalism and preserving the nation-state, there is one issue we need to settle. The distinction often made between ethno-nationalism, where you base your national identity on ethnicity, and civic nationalism, where the state determines the national identity. But this distinction is bogus. Basically, it relies on the ambiguity around the word ethnicity. Ethnicity is sometimes associated with biology, in other words, with race, and then only people who belong to that race can be part of it. But today, when we talk of ethnicity, we usually mean a group of people with a shared set of values that may have originated in one tribe, but anyone who adopts these values can become part of it. If we go by the first definition, then no country in today's world is an ethno-state. And if we go by the second definition, then every nation-state in today's world is an ethno-state. This ambiguity is exploited by today's white nationalists, who go by the first definition to base their nationality on race, while using the second definition to point to other nation-states, and innocently claim that they merely want to be like them. It is also exploited by globalists, who try to undermine nation-states by claiming that they are ethno-states. Wait, you might say, is every nation-state in the world truly an ethno-state? Isn't American nationality, for instance, an example of civic nationality? Absolutely not. There is definitely an American ethnicity, in the sense of a history and a set of values that distinguish it, and this ethnic identity is drilled into American minds in schools, in all their national ceremonies, and pretty much wherever they go in America. When an American is visiting another country, they are recognized as American, because they have the distinct American behavior and attitude, determined by their American ethnicity. The US is an ethno-state just as much as any other nation-state is, and would collapse if it didn't have that strong ethnic identity. The same goes for Canada, France, or any other democracy that pretends it isn't an ethno-state. The only distinction that is valid is between exclusive and inclusive nationality. By exclusive, I mean a nation that prevents other people from joining it based on an identity other than their national identity. Saudi Arabia, for instance, does not let non-Muslims become Saudi. That's an example of exclusive nationality, because it rejects people based on religion. White nationalism is another example, this time relying on race. The liberal nationalism that I'm espousing is, of course, inclusive. Anyone should be able to become part of the nation, if they adopt a national identity and its values. This, then, is what I believe the liberal position should be. Of course, things might change. The world is getting smaller, and the differences between the nations are diminishing. There may come a day when people will no longer feel that other ethnicities are different from theirs, and the global society will become a possibility. If that day comes, I will be for leaving the nation-states behind. But I do not believe that this day will come in my lifetime, or in yours. The globalists, and when I say globalists, I mean those with the extreme left view, believe the reverse is true. They don't believe a global society can emerge in the bottom-up way that I described, but want to achieve it in a top-down manner. They believe that if we create a global system, it will generate a global society, and will bring world peace. I don't see this position as any different, in essence, from the extreme right-wing position. The globalists will claim that the difference is that they are not trying to impose their identity on the rest of the world, but they most certainly are. The globalists pretend that they are speaking in the name of all of humanity, but they are actually imposing their idea of what humanity is on the rest of us. No one knows what shared identity and values would make every human in the globe content. It will always be an identity and values that you impose. One day, things may change, but until then, globalism, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing.